I'm Melissa, 29 years old, and I just lost my dad to cancer. We were incredibly close, and his death left a void nothing could fill. Mom started acting strange shortly after the funeral, more concerned with her social calendar than mourning. Then came the bombshell. 2 months after we buried Dad, she brought home Rick and his two teenage kids. Last night, they told me I need to move out of my childhood home, the home Dad wanted me to have. Before I dive into this heartbreaking story, where are you watching from? Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when no one else would. Growing up in our colonial-style home in suburban Connecticut, I experienced a childhood filled with warmth and security. The two-story white house with navy blue shutters sat on a tree-lined street perfectly maintained by my father James, who took immense pride in our family home. He'd spend weekends tending to the garden, fixing creaky stairs, and ensuring everything functioned properly. This house wasn't just a structure to him, it represented everything he valued: family stability and legacy. Dad and I shared a special bond that grew stronger as I got older. Every summer since I was 8, we'd take father-daughter fishing trips to the lake an hour north of our home. Those quiet mornings on the water, watching the sun rise while waiting for fish to bite, were when Dad shared his most valuable life lessons. He taught me patience, perseverance, and how to find beauty in silence. Even as a teenager, when most girls distanced themselves from their fathers, I treasured our time together. He supported my decision to study graphic design in college, never once suggesting I pursue something more practical, as many parents might. When I showed him my portfolio, his eyes would light up with genuine pride. "You see the world differently, Melissa," he'd say, "and that's your greatest strength." His unwavering belief in my talents gave me the confidence to freelance after graduation instead of taking a corporate job. My mother, Diana, was loving in her own way, but always maintained a certain emotional distance, while Dad concerned himself with my happiness and growth. Mom focused more on appearances and social standing. She was active in local charity organizations and spent considerable time maintaining relationships with influential community members. Her standard question wasn't, "Are you happy?" but rather, "What will people think?" Despite this difference in parenting styles, our family functioned well together. Our holiday traditions became the cornerstone of our family connection. Dad would insist on cutting down our own Christmas tree every year, and Mom would pretend to complain about the pine needles while secretly enjoying the tradition. Thanksgiving meant Dad's famous turkey and Mom's picture-perfect table setting. These moments, along with our Sunday night family dinners where electronics were banned, created a tapestry of memories that defined my childhood. 2 years ago, I moved back home after working in Boston for several years. The pandemic had shifted my graphic design work to fully remote, and Dad suggested I save money by living with them while building my client base. "No sense throwing money away on rent when you could be saving for your own place," he said practically. Mom agreed, though I sometimes caught her telling friends I was between situations, rather than admitting I'd made a strategic financial decision. The arrangement worked surprisingly well for adults sharing space. I converted the guest room into a home office, contributed to household expenses, and helped with cooking and maintenance. Dad and I would often work side by side, me on my laptop designing logos or websites, him reviewing insurance claims from his home office. He'd retired early from his position as an insurance adjuster, but maintained a few loyal clients. My boyfriend Thomas fit seamlessly into our family dynamic. A software engineer with an easygoing personality, he connected with Dad over their shared love of baseball and classic rock. They'd spend hours debating the greatest albums of the 70s or discussing the prospects for the Yankees season. Mom approved of Thomas primarily because he came from a good family and had a stable career, but even she couldn't help warming to his genuine charm. Last summer, before Dad's diagnosis, we took what would become our final family vacation to coastal Maine. For one perfect week, we stayed in a rented cottage overlooking the Atlantic. Dad seemed younger somehow, racing me into the frigid ocean waters each morning, collecting seashells with the enthusiasm of a child. In the evenings, we'd build bonfires on the beach, roast marshmallows, and talk about everything and nothing. Thomas joined us for the weekend portion, and I remember watching him and Dad laughing together as they attempted to grill lobster, thinking how lucky I was to have these relationships. The house itself held generations of memories. The slight depression in the third step of the staircase from decades of footsteps. the height markers in my bedroom closet tracking my growth from toddler to adult, the kitchen table where I'd done homework while Dad paid bills. Every corner contained some piece of our family history, tangible reminders of a lifetime of love. Though I planned to eventually purchase my own place, the comfort of living in a home filled with such meaningful history made the arrangement perfect for this chapter of my life. Looking back now, I cherish those ordinary days. Dad making his terrible but enthusiastic attempts at pancakes on Sunday mornings. Mom fussing over holiday decorations. The three of us watching Jeopardy and competing to shout out answers first. The predictable, comfortable rhythm of family life that I never imagined could shatter so completely so quickly. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday morning 8 months ago. Dad had gone for what we thought was a routine checkup after experiencing some back pain and digestive issues. Mom called from the doctor's office, her voice unnaturally steady. They found something on the scan. We need more tests. Those tests confirmed our worst fears, pancreatic cancer already at stage 4. The doctor spoke gently about treatment options while avoiding direct discussions of survival rates, but the grim reality hung in the air. Dad, always practical, asked the questions no one wanted to voice. How long? The doctor's hesitant answer of possibly 6 months with treatment fell like a physical blow. Dad approached his diagnosis with the same methodical care he'd applied to everything in life. He researched treatment options, organized his financial affairs, and insisted on maintaining as much normalcy as possible. "I'm dying," he told me one evening as we sat alone in his study, "but I'm not dead yet, and I don't want to live like I am." The initial rounds of chemotherapy seemed promising. Dad tolerated the treatments better than expected, maintained his appetite, and even continued working remotely with his few remaining clients. Mom accompanied him to medical appointments, but seemed uncomfortable with the hospital environment and the physical realities of his illness. She'd arrange for meals to be delivered and keep the house spotless, but would find reasons to be busy elsewhere when Dad needed help managing his increasingly difficult symptoms. I gradually shifted my work schedule to accommodate becoming Dad's primary caregiver. Early mornings and late nights became my work hours, while days were spent driving Dad to appointments, managing his medications, and simply sitting with him as his energy waned. He never complained, though I knew he was in considerable pain. Instead, he used our time together to share stories I'd never heard before about his childhood, his early days with Mom, his hopes for my future. 3 months after diagnosis, it became clear the treatments weren't working. The cancer continued spreading aggressively, and Dad made the decision to stop chemotherapy and focus on quality of life. The hospice nurse guided us through setting up a hospital bed in the downstairs study so Dad wouldn't have to navigate the stairs. Mom seemed relieved to have professional help and increasingly delegated Dad's care to me and the visiting nurses. In those final weeks, Dad and I had conversations I'll treasure forever. One afternoon, as I adjusted his pillows, he took my hand with surprising strength. "I need you to promise me something, Melissa," he said, his voice weaker but his eyes still bright. "Promise you'll take care of your mother. She's not as strong as she pretends to be. And keep our family together. This house should stay in the family. Pass it down someday to your own children." I promised through tears, not realizing how impossible that promise would become. Dad slipped away peacefully one morning, as I sat beside him reading aloud from his favorite Hemingway novel. One moment he was breathing, and the next he wasn't. The simplicity of death contradicted the enormity of loss. Mom was upstairs when it happened, having just gone to shower after the night shift of sitting with him. When I called her down, her reaction surprised me. Rather than collapse in grief, she nodded almost clinically and immediately began making phone calls to the funeral home and relatives. The funeral was a blur of black clothing casseroles and condolences. Dad's siblings flew in from Arizona and Florida bringing their families. My cousins, whom I rarely saw, embraced me with genuine sympathy. Mom's sister Janet stayed with us for the first week, efficiently managing the endless stream of visitors and well-wishers. Throughout it all, Mom maintained a composed demeanor that concerned our relatives. "Is Diana doing okay?" I overheard Aunt Janet asking Thomas during the reception after the funeral. "She seems so collected." Thomas had no answer, and neither did I. Mom had always valued composure, but her almost businesslike approach to Dad's death felt jarring and wrong. After the relatives departed and the initial shock subsided, I expected Mom and I would grieve together, sharing memories and supporting each other through the overwhelming loss. Instead, she seemed eager to return to normal life with unsettling speed. 2 weeks after the funeral, she resumed her charity committee meetings and lunch dates with friends. She spoke of Dad, rarely changing the subject whenever I mentioned him. I threw myself into work as a distraction, but found concentration impossible. Projects that should have taken days stretched into weeks as I stared blankly at my computer screen, overcome by waves of grief at unexpected moments. A client's feedback that James would have loved this design left me sobbing for hours. Thomas came every weekend, providing silent support and gentle encouragement to eat and sleep when basic self-care became challenging. During a meeting with Dad's lawyer, we learned that he'd left the house jointly to Mom and me with the explicit intention that it remain in the family. The rest of his modest estate, including life insurance and retirement accounts, went primarily to Mom, with a small trust set aside for me. The joint ownership of the house seemed to irritate Mom, though she said nothing directly. As weeks passed, Mom began claiming she was attending support groups and therapy sessions several evenings a week. "I'm getting the help I need to move forward," she'd say, before heading out in outfits far more polished than typical therapy attire. I wanted to believe her efforts at healing were genuine, even if her approach differed from mine. Meanwhile, I clung to Dad's memory by maintaining his workshop in the garage, sitting in his favorite chair, and cooking his recipes. Each activity became a ritual of remembrance, a way to feel his presence in a house that felt increasingly empty, despite Mom's physical presence. I understood everyone grieves differently, but the disconnect between my shattered heart and Mom's apparent resilience grew wider by the day. One night, I found a handwritten list in Dad's desk drawer titled, "When I'm Gone." It contained simple instructions for various aspects of life he'd managed: when to service the furnace, which company to call for plumbing emergencies, how to restart the finicky washing machine. His final instruction read, "Love each other. That's what matters most." I clutched that paper to my chest and wept, wondering how Mom could seemingly discard these sentiments so easily. The first alarming changes in Mom began approximately 2 weeks after Dad's funeral. I came downstairs one morning to find her examining her reflection in the hallway mirror, turning her head from side to side with critical assessment. 3 hours later, she returned from town with shopping bags from boutiques she'd previously considered frivolous, and a dramatically shorter hairstyle highlighted in a shade of blonde I'd never seen on her before. "What do you think?" she asked, running her fingers through the new style. "The stylist said it takes years off." The question caught me off guard. Dad had been dead barely 14 days, and Mom was concerned with looking younger. "It's different." I managed, unsure how to respond to this unexpected transformation. Mom seemed disappointed by my lukewarm reaction and retreated to her bedroom with her shopping bags. Over the next several days, I noticed other changes. Mom's conservative wardrobe of tailored slacks and sensible blouses disappeared, replaced by clothing I would have described as more youthful and attention-seeking. Dresses with lower necklines, higher hemlines, and brighter colors filled her closet. Her makeup, previously subtle and appropriate for a woman in her 60s, became more pronounced with dramatic eyeshadow and glossy lipstick. When I attempted to talk with her about Dad, share memories, or simply acknowledge our shared grief, Mom would quickly change the subject or find a reason to leave the room. "I can't dwell on the past, Melissa," she said during one of my attempts. "James wouldn't want me sitting around crying all day." While that might have been true of Dad's practical nature, her complete avoidance of mourning felt wrong. I tried again, gentler this time. "Maybe we could look through some photo albums together. I found some great pictures of you and Dad from your anniversary trip last year." Mom's response was immediate and cold. "I don't see how reopening wounds helps anyone. You need to focus on moving forward too." She gathered her purse and keys. "I'm meeting my support group. Don't wait up." These support groups became increasingly frequent, sometimes occurring 3 or 4 nights a week. Mom would leave the house impeccably dressed, return late, smelling faintly of wine, and offer vague responses to questions about these therapeutic sessions. When I expressed interest in perhaps joining her at one meeting seeking support for my own grief, she quickly dismissed the idea. My group wouldn't be right for you. You should find one for a younger people. One afternoon, I discovered Mom on her phone in the backyard, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years, perhaps ever. The sound was so foreign that I paused at the window watching her animated conversation. When she spotted me, her demeanor instantly changed, her voice dropping as she quickly ended the call. "Just chatting with Janet," she explained, though something in her expression suggested otherwise. The most distressing changes involved Dad's belongings. I came home from a client meeting to find boxes stacked in the hallway filled with Dad's clothing books and personal items. Mom had systematically begun removing all traces of him from the house without discussion. "What are you doing with Dad's things?" I asked, trying to keep accusation from my voice. "Donating them," Mom replied matter-of-factly. "They're just collecting dust and someone else can use them." "Shouldn't we have talked about this first? Maybe I wanted some of his things." Mom sighed as if dealing with an unreasonable child. "Take whatever you want, but the rest goes tomorrow. We can't turn the house into a shrine, Melissa." I spent that night sorting through boxes, salvaging Dad's favorite flannel shirts, his collection of paperback classics, and the fishing tackle box we'd used on our trips. The next morning, most of his possessions disappeared with the Goodwill truck erasing his physical presence from our home with clinical efficiency. The breaking point came when I arrived home from grocery shopping to find Dad's beloved leather recliner sitting at the curb with a free sign taped to it. The chair where he'd read to me as a child, where he'd watched countless baseball games, where he'd sat during our last Christmas together, was being discarded like worthless trash. "How could you?" I confronted Mom, my voice shaking. "That was Dad's favorite chair." "It was old and didn't match the new decor I'm planning," Mom replied coolly. "Besides, it reminded me of him sitting there sick. I don't need those memories. Those memories are all I have left of him." The words burst out as tears streamed down my face. I rushed outside, removed the sign, and attempted to drag the heavy chair back up the driveway. A neighbor from across the street noticed my struggle and helped me bring it to the garage, where I placed it carefully in Dad's workshop space, now a sanctuary of sorts. As April turned to May, Mom became increasingly critical of my living arrangement and career choices. "At your age, I was married with a mortgage," she'd comment pointedly. "Don't you think it's time you established your own household?" These sentiments contrasted sharply with her previous support of my living at home to build savings. The true nature of Mom's support groups became clear when Caitlin, a longtime family friend, called me with awkward news. "I thought you should know. I saw your mom on Silver Singles. Her profile says recently widowed and ready for adventure." The revelation that Mom had joined dating apps mere weeks after Dad's death felt like a physical blow. When confronted, Mom became defensive. "I'm 62 years old, not dead. James is gone and I need to live my life." "Dad's been gone less than 2 months," I countered, struggling to understand her haste. "And no amount of waiting will bring him back," she replied coldly. "You might choose to put your life on hold, but I won't." Shortly after this conversation, Mom began mentioning her friend Rick in passing references. "Rick says this restaurant has excellent seafood," or "Rick recommends this brand of coffee." I gathered he was someone from her mysterious evening activities, but she offered no details, and I was still too raw from our previous confrontation to ask. What hurt most during this period was hearing Mom laugh on her increasingly frequent phone calls, a carefree sound absent during her decades with Dad. Had she been unhappy all those years? The question haunted me as I watched this stranger emerge from my mother's familiar form, someone unrecognizable in her priorities and behaviors. One evening I discovered Mom had removed the family photos from the living room walls, including the large portrait from their 30th anniversary. In their place hung abstract prints in bold colors that Dad would have hated. It wasn't just Dad being erased now, but our entire family history replaced by a sanitized present with no acknowledgement of the past. The evening that changed everything arrived without warning 6 weeks after Dad's funeral. I was working late on a website design project when I heard Mom's key in the lock, followed by unfamiliar male laughter. Assuming it was one of our neighbors, I saved my work and headed downstairs to investigate. Standing in our front hallway was a tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair and an expensive-looking watch. He had the artificial tan and too white smile of someone preoccupied with appearances. Mom stood beside him, her hand resting on his arm with intimate familiarity. "Melissa, this is Rick Peterson," Mom announced, her voice carrying a girlish quality I'd never heard before. "Rick, my daughter Melissa, who I've told you about." Rick extended his hand with practiced charm. "Diana has told me so much about you. It's great to finally meet the talented artist in the family." His grip was too firm, his smile never reaching his eyes as he assessed me. "Nice to meet you," I responded automatically, though questions raced through my mind. Finally meet me. How long had Mom been seeing this man? Why hadn't she mentioned bringing someone home? Mom bustled about, taking Rick's expensive leather jacket and offering drinks with the nervous energy of a teenager on a first date. "Rick's going to join us for dinner. I've ordered from that Italian place on Maple Street." Throughout dinner, Rick dominated the conversation with stories about his real estate investments, his recent trip to Barbados, and his custom golf clubs. He referred to Mom exclusively as D, a nickname Dad had never used and I'd never heard. Mom hung on his every word, laughing too loudly at his mediocre jokes and repeatedly touching his arm. As the evening progressed, I noticed how Rick subtly criticized our home, commenting on the outdated kitchen and inefficient floor plan, with the assessing eye of someone evaluating property value rather than appreciating a family home. Each comment seemed to carry an unspoken follow-up, how he would improve things if given the chance. When I mentioned preserving some aspects of the house because they mattered to Dad, Rick's expression tightened momentarily before he smoothly responded. "Sometimes living in the past prevents us from embracing the future. Wouldn't you agree? Di?" Mom nodded enthusiastically, as if he'd spoken profound wisdom instead of a thinly veiled dismissal of Dad's memory. The true shock came at the end of the evening, when instead of saying goodbye, Rick carried an overnight bag upstairs to Mom's bedroom. Our eyes met briefly as he ascended the stairs, a flash of triumph in his expression, making my stomach turn. This wasn't his first night here. This was simply the first time Mom hadn't bothered hiding him from me. The next morning revealed the full extent of the situation. Rick emerged from Mom's room wearing Dad's monogrammed bathrobe, helping himself to coffee in Dad's mug. He moved through our kitchen with the confidence of someone already considering the space his own. When I cornered Mom alone, her revelations stunned me further. She and Rick hadn't met at a support group as I'd assumed, but through mutual friends at her country club. They'd been dating for nearly 7 weeks, which meant their relationship had begun while Dad was still alive during his final days on hospice care. "You were seeing him before Dad died?" I asked, disbelieving. "We were just friends then," Mom replied defensively, though her flushed cheeks suggested otherwise. "Rick was very supportive during that difficult time." "Does he know you weren't even widowed when you met him?" "Don't be dramatic, Melissa. Your father was dying. I was alone and afraid." "You weren't alone. I was right here with you with Dad while you were apparently out dating." Mom's expression hardened. "You don't understand what it's like to lose a spouse. I needed someone to help me through it. Dad was my father. I was losing him too, and I didn't abandon him for the first man who showed interest." The argument ended with Mom storming off, but the damage was done. The overnight visit morphed into Rick simply never leaving. His toiletries appeared in Mom's bathroom, his clothes in her closet, his favorite foods in our pantry. Our home became his home without discussion or agreement, my role in the household diminishing with each passing day. During that first week of Rick's constant presence, I learned more about him through pointed questions and careful observation. At 68, he was 6 years older than Mom and had been divorced 3 times. The real estate empire he'd boasted about consisted largely of properties he managed rather than owned, and his current employment situation was vague at best. He claimed to be between projects and consulting terms that seemed to mask a lack of actual income. Then came the weekend, bringing another unwelcome surprise. Rick's 2 children from his second marriage arrived with overnight bags and entitled attitudes. Jason, 17, immediately commandeered the living room television, changing channels without asking and putting his feet on the coffee table Dad had hand restored. Ashley, 15, explored the house with the critical eye of her father, making comments about the retro decor and questioning why we didn't have a pool. "Where will they sleep?" I asked Mom privately, assuming the visitors would be temporary. "Jason can use the guest room downstairs and Ashley will take the small room next to yours," Mom replied, as if the arrangement had always been obvious. "They'll be staying every other weekend and some holidays going forward." "Going forward, Mom, we didn't discuss any of this. Rick and I made the arrangements with his ex-wife. The kids need stability." "What about my stability? This is happening so fast, and this is still my home too." Mom's expression softened briefly. "I know it's an adjustment, but Rick makes me happy. Can't you try to be happy for me?" The adjustment continued as Rick established himself as the de facto head of household. Dad's study became Rick's man cave, complete with a massive television and leather sectional sofa that overwhelmed the modest room. Family dinner conversations shifted to revolve around Rick's opinions and preferences, Mom deferring to him with alarming frequency. "Rick thinks" and "Rick says" became Mom's standard prefixes for decisions about everything from dinner choices to financial matters. When I suggested preserving Dad's vegetable garden in the backyard, Mom immediately looked to Rick for his opinion, dismissing my wishes when he suggested replacing it with a more aesthetically pleasing seating area. Thomas witnessed these dynamics during his weekend visits, his concern growing with each observation. "This doesn't feel right," he whispered one night as we heard Rick loudly instructing Mom on how she should rearrange her investment portfolio. "He's taking over everything, and your mom is just letting it happen." One particularly painful Sunday afternoon, I overheard Rick on the phone describing his plans to modernize the outdated property and finally make this place livable. He spoke about our family home as if it were merely a real estate opportunity with no regard for its history or meaning. When Thomas questioned Rick's employment status during dinner, asking innocently about his current projects, the resulting anger was disproportionate. Rick's face flushed as he launched into a vague explanation about high-level negotiations and confidential deals, ultimately suggesting Thomas couldn't understand the sophisticated nature of his work. Later that week, I discovered through online research that Rick had been unemployed for nearly 8 months after being asked to leave his previous property management position under unclear circumstances. His polished exterior and confident demeanor masked financial problems and a pattern of moving between relationships with established financially secure women. Thomas urged me to consider moving in with him in the city. "This situation isn't healthy, Melissa. You're watching your home and family history be dismantled piece by piece." I couldn't disagree, but the promise I'd made to Dad held me back. I promised him I'd take care of Mom and keep the family together. I can't just abandon everything he worked for. Little did I know how thoroughly that promise would be tested in the coming weeks. 2 months after Dad's passing, Rick and his children moved in permanently, creating untenable living conditions in what had once been my sanctuary. The physical space became crowded with 5 adults sharing areas designed for 3, but the emotional tensions created the true claustrophobia. The first territorial claim happened in the upstairs bathroom that I'd used exclusively since moving back home. I returned from a morning run to find Ashley's makeup, hair tools, and personal items spread across the counter, my own toiletries pushed into a small corner of the cabinet. When I politely asked about the arrangement, Ashley rolled her eyes. "Dad said I should use this bathroom since it's closer to my room. You can use the one downstairs." The downstairs bathroom was tiny, lacking counter space and proper lighting for my morning routine. When I raised the issue with Mom, she seemed uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict Rick's decision. "It's just a bathroom, Melissa. The kids need to feel welcome here." "What about me feeling welcome? This is my home." Mom's expression hardened slightly. "It's everyone's home now. We need to adjust." The adjustments continued rapidly. Without warning or discussion, Mom began redecorating my childhood bedroom for Ashley, claiming the girl needed a proper space, rather than the smaller guest room initially assigned to her. My books, mementos, and personal items were boxed up and relocated to the significantly smaller room at the end of the hall, many ending up haphazardly stored in the garage due to lack of space. But that's my room, I protested, watching as the pale blue walls I'd helped Dad paint during my high school years were covered with Ashley's preferred bright pink. You're almost 30, Melissa, Mom replied dismissively. It's time to let go of childhood things. Besides, you'll be finding your own place soon anyway, right? The implication was clear. My presence in the home was now considered temporary, despite the joint ownership Dad had legally established. Rick established new household rules that applied primarily to me. Quiet hours after 9 p.m. when I traditionally worked on design projects. No guests without advance notice, which complicated Thomas's weekend visits. Limitations on kitchen use during certain hours when Rick preferred to watch television without distraction. Each restriction seemed designed to make my continuing presence in the house more difficult. Most concerning was how Mom supported these changes without question. When I attempted to discuss the unfairness, she would sigh heavily. Rick is trying to create order in a crowded situation. You're old enough to understand compromise. The compromise, it seemed, was entirely one-sided. Rick's children came and went freely, inviting friends over without notice, leaving messes throughout common areas, and consuming food I had purchased without consideration. Meanwhile, I felt increasingly like an unwelcome guest in my own home. Thomas witnessed the deteriorating situation during a Friday visit in early July. Rick's son Jason had taken Thomas's overnight bag from the entryway and tossed it outside, claiming he thought it belonged to someone else. The deliberate nature of the act was obvious, as was Rick's barely concealed amusement, when Thomas calmly retrieved his belongings. Later that evening, as Thomas and I conversed quietly in the living room, Rick interrupted repeatedly with loud comments and questions, clearly attempting to assert dominance in the space. When Thomas politely but firmly continued our conversation, Rick's demeanor shifted to outright hostility. "In my house, guests show proper respect," he stated loudly. Thomas set down his coffee cup slowly. "With all due respect, Mr. Peterson, this isn't solely your house. Melissa is a legal co-owner and I'm her invited guest." The silence that followed was electric. Rick's face flushed dark red as he struggled for a response, ultimately storming from the room while muttering about ungrateful dependents. The confrontation marked a turning point as Rick's behavior toward me deteriorated from passive-aggressive to openly antagonistic. Items began disappearing from my room and workspace. Important client files mysteriously relocated or vanished entirely. My external hard drive containing years of design work was found in the garage recycling bin, Rick claiming he'd mistaken it for trash. Dad's fishing tackle box, one of my most treasured keepsakes, disappeared entirely, with Rick suggesting perhaps I'd misplaced it myself. When I attempted to discuss property rights and inheritance with Mom, her response revealed how completely Rick had influenced her thinking. "The house may be partially yours on paper, but I'm still your mother and Rick and I make the decisions here. Dad wanted me to have a place in this home. That's why he left it to both of us." "Your father didn't anticipate my finding happiness again," Mom replied coldly. "He would want me to move forward with my life." Thomas, concerned by the escalating situation, began investigating Rick's background more thoroughly. Through connections in real estate and careful online research, he uncovered a troubling pattern. Rick had a history of moving in with financially secure women shortly after they experienced significant life changes, divorce, illness, or widowhood. In at least 2 cases, the women had ultimately sold their homes and made questionable investments at Rick's suggestion, resulting in financial losses, while Rick somehow emerged with improved circumstances. "He's a predator, Melissa," Thomas said gravely after sharing his findings. "He targets vulnerable women and systematically isolates them from family while establishing control over their assets." I'd suspected something similar, but hearing the pattern confirmed sent chills through me. More alarming was discovering Rick had gained access to family financial accounts. While helping Mom with computer issues, I noticed joint checking and savings accounts now featuring Rick's name alongside hers despite their unmarried status and relatively short relationship. When confronted, Mom became defensive. "Rick helps me manage my finances. He has experience with investments that I don't." "Mom, You've successfully managed money for decades. Dad taught you everything about your accounts. Well, perhaps your father's methods were outdated. Rick has shown me ways to make my money work harder. The final blow came when I discovered Mom had consulted a lawyer about forcing me to sell my portion of the house to her, and Rick, despite Dad's explicit wishes. A careless email left open on the family computer revealed correspondence between Mom and an attorney discussing options for compelling a sale from a reluctant co-owner. The inevitable confrontation arrived on a muggy July evening, 2 months and 3 days after Dad's funeral. Rick had suggested a family dinner with unusual enthusiasm, even ordering from my favorite Italian restaurant. The forced pleasantness immediately put me on edge, a sensation that proved warranted as the meal progressed. After a tense hour of superficial conversation, Rick cleared his throat dramatically and placed his hand over Mom's. "Diana and I have some exciting news to share." My mother smiled with nervous anticipation as Rick continued. "We've decided to undertake some significant renovations to bring this lovely old home into the modern era." The word "old" carried subtle disdain as he detailed ambitious plans to gut the kitchen, remove walls to create an open-concept main floor, and convert the garage, my father's beloved workshop, into an entertainment room complete with a wet bar and gaming area. "These changes will require some adjustments for everyone," Rick continued smoothly. "The construction will make parts of the house unlivable for weeks, possibly months." "Where will everyone stay during construction?" I asked, already sensing where this was heading. "Well, Diana and I will take the children to my condo in Westport," Rick replied. "It will be crowded, but we'll manage until the worst of the construction is complete." "And where am I supposed to go?" The question hung in the air as Rick and Mom exchanged glances. Mom took a deep breath. "Honey, Rick and I have been talking. You're a successful professional now, and we think it's time for you to start your own life independently." The careful phrasing didn't disguise the meaning. They weren't suggesting I find temporary accommodation during renovations. They wanted me out permanently. "You're kicking me out of my own home, the home Dad left to both of us." "Nobody's kicking you out," Rick interjected with poorly disguised irritation. "We're simply suggesting it's time for an adult woman to have her own place rather than living with her mother. It's the natural order of things." The natural order would have been respecting my father's memory for more than 8 weeks before moving a stranger into his house. I responded, struggling to control my voice. Mom's expression hardened. "That's unfair, Melissa. Your father wouldn't want me to be alone. He also wouldn't want his daughter homeless. He specifically left this house to both of us because he wanted it to stay in the family, to be passed down eventually to my children." "Plans change," Rick stated flatly. "Diana deserves to enjoy her life without the burden of an adult child still dependent on her." "I'm not dependent. I contribute to household expenses. I handle maintenance. I help with everything around here, and this is legally my house too." Rick's false pleasantness evaporated. "The legal situation can be addressed. Diana has already consulted with attorneys about forcing a property sale if necessary." The confirmation of what I'd suspected felt like a physical blow. I turned to Mom, searching for any sign of the woman who had raised me. "Is that true? You'd force me out against Dad's wishes?" Mom couldn't meet my eyes. "Your father wouldn't want you dependent forever, Melissa. He'd want you to establish your own household, find your own way." "Don't you dare tell me what Dad would want." The words burst from me with unexpected force. "He made me promise to take care of you, to keep this family together. I was with him every day while he was dying, while you were out meeting him." I gestured toward Rick, whose face darkened with anger. "That's quite enough," Rick stated coldly. "If you can't discuss this rationally, perhaps we should set a timeline. 30 days should be sufficient for you to find alternative arrangements." "I won't be bullied out of my legal property," I replied, rising from the table. "And I won't let you erase everything my father built." Rick's expression turned ugly. "Don't make this difficult, Melissa. I've dealt with stubborn relatives before. It never ends well for them." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air as Mom sat silently, making no move to defend me. In that moment, I truly saw how completely this man had isolated and influenced her in the short time since Dad's death. I retreated to Dad's workshop in the garage, the last untouched sanctuary in a home increasingly foreign to me. Surrounded by his tools, the workbench where we'd built birdhouses and repaired furniture together, I felt the full weight of betrayal crushing down. Not just Rick's opportunistic invasion, but Mom's willing participation in dismantling everything Dad had created. While searching for the comfort of Dad's presence among his belongings, I discovered a metal box tucked beneath a loose floorboard under the workbench. Inside lay Dad's private journal and several sealed envelopes, including one addressed to me marked, "For Melissa when you need guidance." With shaking hands, I opened the letter to find Dad's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Melissa, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're facing challenges. I hoped you wouldn't encounter so soon. I've always known your mother might struggle without me in ways that could impact you. Her fear of being alone has always been her greatest vulnerability. The house is legally half yours, not just because I wanted you to have a home, but because I knew you would protect what matters most, our family legacy and values. Stand firm in your rights, but remember that compassion sometimes means letting go of things to save people. Whatever happens, know that home isn't just walls and a roof. It's the memories we carry, the lessons we've shared, and the love that can't be erased by anyone. All my love, Dad." Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the letter. In that moment of deepest despair, Thomas called, immediately sensing my distress. After hearing the evening's events, he drove straight over, determined not to leave me alone in such a volatile situation. The morning after the confrontation, I woke with newfound clarity and determination. Dad's letter had reminded me of what truly mattered, and Thomas had helped me see that standing up for myself wasn't betraying my promise to Dad. It was fulfilling it in the most important ways. "Your father wanted you to care for your mother, but not at the cost of your own well-being," Thomas had reasoned as we sat in Dad's workshop late into the night. "And he certainly wouldn't want you bullied out of your inheritance by someone taking advantage of her vulnerability." Rather than responding emotionally to Rick's ultimatum, I chose a strategic approach. My first call was to Karen, a law school friend who specialized in estate and property law. After explaining the situation and forwarding Dad's will and property documents, Karen confirmed what I already knew as joint owner. I couldn't be forced out without legal proceedings, which would likely fail given Dad's clear intentions in his will. "They're banking on intimidating you into leaving voluntarily," Karen explained. "Once you're out, it would be much harder to reclaim your rights. Stand your ground legally while considering your long-term options." Armed with this knowledge and proper legal documentation, I arranged a formal meeting with Mom and Rick in the living room the following afternoon. Thomas accompanied me as both support and witness, his calm professional demeanor adding weight to my position. "I've consulted with legal counsel regarding my rights to this property." I began placing the relevant documents on the coffee table. "As joint owner with equal interest in the house, I cannot be evicted or forced to sell without my consent." Rick's face flushed with anger, but I continued before he could interrupt. "Additionally, I've documented the original intentions for this property as expressed in Dad's will and supplemental letters. Any attempt to force a sale would involve lengthy court proceedings where these intentions would be presented." Mom looked genuinely surprised, as if she hadn't considered I would fight back with legal means rather than emotional appeals. Rick's expression shifted from anger to calculation as he realized the situation wasn't as simple as he'd assumed. "No one wants an ugly legal battle." Rick began smoothly, attempting to regain control. "Surely we can come to a reasonable arrangement that benefits everyone." "I agree," I replied calmly, "which is why I've prepared several options for consideration." I presented 3 scenarios. I could purchase Mom's share of the house at market value if she preferred to leave. We could continue co-owning with clear written agreements about usage and responsibilities. Or we could sell the property and divide the proceeds equally, allowing everyone a fresh start. "What I won't accept," I added firmly, "is being bullied out of my legal inheritance or watching Dad's legacy dismantled for someone else's profit." The direct reference to profit made Rick visibly uncomfortable. Mom looked confused, glancing between us with uncertainty. Seeing my opportunity, I presented the second part of my strategy. "Before we decide anything, I think Mom should have all the information about her current situation." I slid forward a folder containing the evidence Thomas had gathered about Rick's background, including documentation of his employment status, financial history, and pattern of relationships with vulnerable women. "What is this?" Mom asked, reaching for the folder. "Don't bother with that," Rick said sharply, attempting to intercept the documents. "It's just an attempt to create discord. These are public records and factual information," Thomas stated firmly, ensuring Mom received the folder. "Diana deserves to make informed decisions about her future." As Mom began reviewing the contents, Rick's demeanor changed dramatically. The confident, controlling presence gave way to defensive anger. "This is a violation of privacy," he sputtered, watching as Mom's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Is it true you were asked to leave your last position for mismanagement of client funds?" Mom asked quietly, looking up from a disciplinary report from the Real Estate Commission. "That was a misunderstanding that was later resolved," Rick replied too quickly. "And these women?" Mom continued, reviewing the documentation of his previous relationships, all recently widowed or divorced before you moved into their homes. "Coincidence and selective presentation." Rick dismissed, though his confidence was clearly shaken. The most damning evidence came last: bank statements showing significant transfers from Mom's accounts to investment vehicles controlled primarily by Rick, along with applications for home equity loans against our property initiated just days after Rick moved in. "You told me these were joint investments," Mom said, her voice barely audible. "They are technically," Rick responded, avoiding her gaze. "The paperwork just hasn't been updated to reflect that." For the first time since Dad's death, I saw the fog lift from Mom's eyes. The woman who had raised me, who had managed our family finances alongside Dad for decades, re-emerged as she methodically reviewed the evidence. "I think you should leave, Rick," she said finally, her voice gaining strength. "Not just for today. You need to pack your things and go." "Diana, you're upset. We can discuss this after they leave." His attempt to isolate her again was transparent. "There's nothing to discuss. You lied to me, took advantage of my grief, and tried to steal from both me and my daughter." Mom's voice broke slightly, but her resolve remained firm. "I want you out today." Rick's charming facade vanished entirely, replaced by cold fury. "You'll regret this decision. Both of you will." He glared at us before storming upstairs to gather his belongings. Thomas called Rick's ex-wife to arrange immediate pickup of his children and their things, explaining the situation with diplomatic tact. Within hours, the Peterson family's invasion of our home ended as abruptly as it had begun. After they departed, Mom collapsed into Dad's old chair, which I'd rescued from the curb months earlier and kept safely in the garage. Surrounded by the now foreign decor choices influenced by Rick, she seemed suddenly small and lost. "I don't know what happened to me," she whispered. "James would be so disappointed." I sat beside her, taking her hand. "Dad would understand. You were grieving and vulnerable. That doesn't excuse what I did to you, to his memory." Tears flowed freely now, perhaps the first genuine grief she'd allowed herself since his death. "I was so afraid of being alone that I let someone turn me against my own daughter." The conversation that followed lasted deep into the night, painful but necessary for healing. Mom admitted she'd been struggling with unacknowledged depression even before Dad's illness, with his constant support masking her emotional fragility. When he died, the terror of facing life alone had driven her to replace him immediately, rather than process her grief. "I thought if I changed everything, made everything different, it wouldn't hurt so much," she explained. "Rick seemed so confident, so capable of making decisions when I couldn't bear to think clearly." We cried together over Dad's memory, finally sharing the grief that should have united rather than divided us. By morning, exhausted but cleansed, we reached a decision that honored Dad's wishes while allowing us both fresh starts. We would sell the family home and divide the proceeds. Mom would purchase a smaller, more manageable condo near her sister's in Connecticut, while I would use my portion for a down payment on a modest house nearby. Most importantly, we would both attend grief counseling separately and together to process the loss we'd never properly acknowledged. 6 months later, as I placed the last box in my new living room, I felt Dad's presence more strongly than I had since his death. The small craftsman-style house with its generous yard and detached garage workshop felt immediately like home, particularly with Thomas helping arrange furniture and hanging Dad's restored fishing tackle on the wall of the study. I'd purchased a home just 10 minutes from Mom's new condo, close enough to visit regularly, but with healthy boundaries established. Her apartment suited her perfectly, a manageable space in a community with activities and companionship. Free from Rick's influence, she'd returned to the capable, thoughtful woman I remembered, though with a new vulnerability and openness about her emotions. Together, we created new traditions to honor Dad's memory. On the anniversary of his death, we planted a Japanese maple in my backyard, his favorite tree. For his birthday, we volunteered at the cancer center, where he'd received treatment, bringing coffee and conversation to patients and families navigating their own difficult journeys. The healing process wasn't linear or simple. Some days, grief still overwhelmed me, moments when I reached for the phone to call Dad before remembering he was gone. Therapy helped me understand that such moments weren't failures of healing, but evidence of love's endurance beyond death. Mom and I attended a support group for those who had lost family members, finding community among others who understood the complex emotions of grief. Slowly, we rebuilt our relationship on stronger foundations of honesty and shared experience. Thomas proposed on Christmas Eve, presenting a ring containing a small diamond that had belonged to my grandmother, which Dad had saved for this eventual moment. "He gave this to me 3 days before he died," Thomas admitted. "Made me promise to wait until you were ready." The knowledge that Dad had participated in this future moment of joy brought fresh tears, but the happy kind that cleanse rather than wound. We planned a small spring wedding in the garden of my new home, with a chair left empty and adorned with Dad's favorite fishing hat to mark his spiritual presence. Mom found her own path forward, not through replacing Dad, but by developing independence she'd never fully claimed. She took classes at the local community college, joined a hiking group, and even started dating again with appropriate caution and boundaries, after a year of proper grieving and self-discovery. Looking back on those dark months after Dad's death, I realized how grief makes us vulnerable to those who would exploit our pain. Rick had recognized Mom's fear of loneliness and my emotional rawness, using both to manipulate his way into our lives and legacy. Standing up for myself hadn't betrayed my promise to Dad, but fulfilled it in the most meaningful way possible, helping Mom find authentic healing rather than destructive distraction. The greatest lesson I learned was that honoring those we've lost doesn't mean preserving everything exactly as they left it. It means carrying forward their values, their love, and their wisdom while creating new chapters that would make them proud. Dad's physical presence was gone, but his influence continued to shape my choices and priorities. Home, I discovered, wasn't the colonial house with the navy shutters, though I treasured its memories. Home was the strength I'd inherited from Dad, the resilience I'd found within myself, and the family I continued to build, both with those related by blood and those chosen by heart. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after loss, or stand up against someone trying to take what rightfully belongs to you, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. How did you find the strength to move forward? Don't forget to subscribe and share this video if it resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the family we create becomes our greatest strength when the family we were born into falters. Thank you for listening, and I wish you healing and peace on your own journey.